So this is a special session tonight, and I just want to introduce the woman who's going to run this, none other than Dr. Emily Steinhagen. She is more than qualified to be doing this. There's really no one better to lead this session tonight than Dr. Steinhagen. She is an advocate for students and residents alike, and she's very, very knowledgeable, very involved in the committees for ASCRS, and so I look forward to her sharing all of this with you and the group of individuals she has arranged to share their expertise tonight. So I hope a lot of people can benefit from this, and I think this is such a wonderful thing to do. So I'm going to get on mute so you can't hear my kids having a meltdown any longer and turn it over to Dr. Steinhagen.
Thank you. And thank you all for letting us do this tonight. You know, one of the things we had to choose for a panel was whether or not we were going to be a webinar, which meant we wouldn't be able to see you and you wouldn't be able to see each other, or something like this, which has the potential at least to be more of a conversation. And obviously that is what we opted for. This is a project from the ASCRS Residence Committee, which really serves all of you and all of your interests and tries to find ways for you to get involved in colorectal and in ASCRS. So just a plug for that committee. And in case you didn't know, you too can be on an ASCRS committee, whether it's the residence committee or otherwise. When the call for nominations goes out in the spring, you can nominate yourself. John Abelson, who's joining us tonight, taught me that when he showed up on our committee, and I was like, oh, we can have residents here? But it's really a fantastic way to get involved. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to ask you all to kind of wave so that people get a sense of who's who. And then once we get the panel started, I'm going to give each person a first chance at the question. So, you know, the first question is going to go to this person first. Everyone else will chime in. If you, the people who this is targeted towards, have questions, you can shout them out, put them in the chat for everyone, or put them in the chat just for me, and I won't say who it's from. But we really want this to benefit you as much as possible. You might have a burning question at this stage, so I want you to get a chance to ask it. So our panelists tonight. So Dr. Mike Snyder is the program director at UT Houston, who's joining us tonight. Mike, you want to just give us a wave so they know who you are? Thank you. All right. Dr. John Abelson, who's a faculty member and all-around extraordinaire at everything. John's at Leahy, and we're happy to have him joining us tonight. Dr. Sandy Kavalukas is a faculty member at the University of Louisville. Dr. Ali Gazer, who's the director of colorectal transitional care, so from peds to adults at the Ohio State Medical Center. And I didn't see Dr. Khan. Is Brian on? All right, we'll see if he gets here. And then I see Dr. King Mullen hiding out. So we welcome your perspective too. I'm sorry if there are other faculty members on whose names I don't recognize. All right, so as I said, we're going to get started. I have a couple questions prepared, but your questions are better than mine because they're your questions. So let me know what you want me to ask or if you want to jump in. I also want to just give a special thanks to Dr. Kevin Lynch, who's a member of our residence committee. He's a general surgery resident at UVA, and he really helped me put this together nicely. So just want to recognize his contribution. All right, first question goes to Dr. Snyder and then to everyone else on the panel. What resources do you recommend to identify which programs would be a good fit sort of at this stage of the game for general surgery residents before the application season starts?
Well, you can look at the online presence of the program, but oftentimes that's not, from what I've seen in the past, a really fantastic way of getting a real feel for the program. Going to the meeting and talking to people who are either members of the program or who are graduates of the program is very good. I'm talking about the ASCRS meeting. Going and talking to the other colorectal surgeons who are at your institution to learn about the reputation of the program or really possible graduates that you can call to talk about the program. Getting as close a firsthand look at the program is best. All the programs have the same basic format. And so really knowing about the strengths or weaknesses of a program almost have to be from people who have experienced the program itself or faculty members there personally.
Any of our other panelists want to chime in here?
Yeah, I can say, can you guys hear me? Okay. I can say that whenever I was getting started and I didn't know what even programs are out there on the American College of Colorectal, on the ASCRS website, there is an APD or CRS tab that will show you every accredited program in the country. So just outside of ones that maybe you know about or you have heard about, there's a complete list by state of every program in the state. And you can, that's at least a good way to identify which programs are out there. And then you can start eliminating by various things with whatever's on your list. But as far as, you know, there may be many programs on there that you haven't heard about. So I would recommend checking out that list on their website.
One other suggestion I have, I know I'm supposed to be moderating, we'll see how poorly I avoid jumping in, is to talk to people who applied a year or two ahead of you, because they interviewed everywhere. And they'll have some impressions, right? Impressions are one person's opinion, but if you can talk to a couple of people, I think that can be really helpful too. All right, Dr. Abelson's gonna talk first and then everyone else will jump in. What are the attributes of a program that you think are important? So if you were going to say, I'm going to make an Excel spreadsheet, what would your column headings be for each program that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some basic objective measures for programs that may or may not suit you. So how many faculty there are, how many fellows there are, geography, you know, academic community. I think those are some basic things that really, no matter who you ask, you're going to get the same answer. And I think that there's obviously benefits to being at different types of programs depending on how you think you're going to learn best. There certainly is, I think, the advantage to be the only child and get all the attention showered upon you and know that you don't have to fight with anybody for any cases. I preferred a slightly different approach where I knew I'd have co-fellows so I could have, you know, lifelong relationships with, and I sort of knew that I wouldn't be able to see everything no matter what, whether I was the only fellow or not. And so being able to have co-fellows who could also be eyes and ears for me in someone else's clinic or OR, and then we could compare notes. So to me, that made a lot of sense. You know, I think some other things that are a little bit more subjective, but I think are also probably important, are is the program, you know, some programs have slightly more of an oncology bend versus IBD, at least historically. There's certainly varying levels of a robotic approach or endoscopic approach or other sort of new tech that you might want to expose yourself to. So those are some initial thoughts. This certainly are more to consider.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that I think you really want to try and sort out what kind of practice you want to go to and see where your focus is going to be and make sure that there are mirrors of that within that program, or if you're not sure, that you have a wide breadth of options as well. I think when you're looking at a program, you know, all these programs are going to give you a strong foundation in a lot of the surgical techniques. They're all very strong, and they're just little minutia between the programs. But you know, ultimately, what you're focused on for your future can help you choose what kind of program you want to apply to and where you feel happy there.
It's a hard thing to really answer because you really don't know until you start to dive down into meeting people at the program. It's more the people than the place. For the most part, every program, you know, has already passed all the bars you need to be accredited. So you're going to get good training everywhere, frankly. But there are certain nuances or certain people that you come in contact with that you say, you know, I would really like to learn from them. And you don't really get a feel for that unless you you know, either have met the people at the meeting or you talk to them via Zoom, since we're having Zoom meetings again this year. But it's sometimes not till that point that you really start to think about where you like to be the best. And I always tell people, keep an open mind. You may find something that you didn't expect while you're looking for something else. So just keep that in mind.
Dr. Kavlakis, do you want to expand a little bit on sort of multi-fellow programs versus small programs versus single fellow programs, and just how you might have approached that, or how you would advise a resident to approach that? How to know what is your preference or your ideal? What else would you consider besides what John said?
Yeah, I think that maybe the residency that you're coming from would be a kind of a good gauge of that. If you came from a large residency and you thrived in it and you enjoyed having a lot of people to bounce ideas off of, then that might be kind of where you want to go. Or if you always hated it and felt like you were competing for cases and stuff, then you might want something that's a little bit smaller sized. I felt like you also have to consider that all these programs are, the larger programs are graduating people, and you'll meet the fellows above you and below you. And so if there's 5 fellows per class, then that's 15 people that you're pretty close to, and you can very quickly build an alumni network, which can be important later down the road, versus just, really wanting to have a tight, 1 or 2 best friends that really feel like you've learned everything from, like a big brother, big sister kind of relationship throughout your training. Just kind of depends on sort of what you're looking for whenever you, it's a very quick year, and to get the most out of it, that's how I would try to figure out if you want to be that solo fellow, or even just have one buddy to kind of get through things with and commiserate with, or if you kind of want to be part of a big group, just like residency all over again.
I'm going to pause for a second and invite everyone to turn on their cameras. Don't be shy. And just to review, in case you joined us, we are doing a panel. This is informal. We do have questions prepared, but I would love to hear your questions, whether you just kind of shout them out at a natural time, put them in the chat and I'll read them, or you can send them directly to me via chat, and I will not say who the question came from. But I the more participation here, the better. Great. Thank you, some of you. All right. Dr. Gazer, does your program do holistic review of applications? That's a hot word right now. So do you do it? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so I guess what it means to me that we do, and to our program, we take a look at the individual in their entirety. That's what that seems to mean to me, that we don't look at just a couple of things. We don't just look at, certain numbers or criteria of where you came from, or AOA, or those kind of things. We look at the individual as a whole. We want to know if make sure they're a good person, not just what's on paper is important to us. It's important that we feel like ultimately that we can get along. We know all the candidates, especially these days in the last few years, they're all top notch. The candidates are very well-rounded. They have research, they have great letters, and they have great ABSITE scores. Everyone's great. So it's really hard to separate people. But I think ultimately, even, when we do the virtual interviews, it comes down to how people seem to be a good fit. Are they going to be more of a partner or a colleague to us? That's really what we look for. We don't necessarily put more weight on ABSITE scores or publication and research. Personal statements, I think, are important, but they're not certainly the highest thing. I think more importantly is just how an individual interviews, if we're going to feel comfortable getting a phone call from them at 3 a.m. or whatnot, and just how they're going to fit within our group from a personality standpoint.
Others, comments, holistic review, something else? And then I'm gonna drill down on some of those points. Those were great. Thank you.
I think that was really a very good, format of how we really look at people. All the numbers, really sort of get you in the door. And as Alexandra said, the vast majority of people meet those numbers. And you look at every aspect of what a person's done, what they've been through, the journey they've taken to get to that point. All of those things matter. And most of us went a somewhat circuitous path, and it all worked out in the end. But what really counts for me and for my colleagues who help to make these decisions are who can live with us for a year where we're going to feel comfortable with, that we think is going to be able to soak up some of the learning that needs to get done, and will be someone that will be proud to say, we trained. And that's really what I'm looking for in a resident. And nothing else is more important than that. And I've trained a great variety of individuals, all of whom I am very proud to have trained. And so everything else doesn't matter besides being able to have the wherewithal and sort of the grit to go forward and be a good surgeon. And that's what I'm looking for.
Other comments about application review as a whole? I'm going to take us back 1 second because Dr. King Mullen messaged me. She's not able to speak, but she just wanted to say, with regards to looking at residencies and different attributes, really consider your base of knowledge that you're coming in with from general surgery. If you haven't done it very many scopes, for example, you need to go to a place where you're going to get that skill. If you have a very strong research base, 1 year at a research heavy program may not be as much of a benefit for you as it would be for someone who needs that. So thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about the ABSITE because Dr. Gazer sort of said, well, everyone has great ABSITE scores. What if you don't? Can we talk a little bit about how that fits into the application? Whether you have one bad one or you're kind of in the middle, but let's say you're not a high scorer on the ABSITE. How do you all read that in an application, Dr. Abelson, Dr. Kavlakis?
Yeah, I think you take it all together. And so, if it's someone who has all bad scores and has no research and the letters are not so great, then it all fits into a picture. If there are a couple bad scores, but everything else is stellar, then okay, some people aren't good test takers. And we all know that there are some times where we are inadvertently put on a 24-hour call shift and then have to take the ABSITE. So there's a variety of reasons why you could not score well for a couple of years. So I wouldn't fret too much if you have a couple bad scores in there, but I think it probably puts a little bit more pressure on you to make sure that everything else is outstanding.
Can someone put a number on what they consider a bad score on the ABSITE?
Less than 20.
I'm going to say that we read a lot of applications. Almost everyone has one low score, whether that's below 30 or a single digit. I think most applications have one. There are precious few who consistently are above the 85th percentile. Great for all of you. It's when it's a pattern of single digits or less than 20 that I think it's an issue.
And the people who have 90th the whole time, I mean, I pay attention to that, but I know when we're in some of those meetings, I'll mention that and they're like, oh, okay, I didn't, some of my other staff might not see that because it's like, okay, who cares? And so just because you have all 90s doesn't mean you're going to be able to match in any program you want.
And I think it's important. We don't really look at ABSITE scores as a measure of how smart you are. We just want to make sure that you're going to be able to pass the board exam at the end of the fellowship. So even if you're showing some improvement or say, yeah, I was really unhappy with my first couple years, and then my residency didn't put a lot of emphasis on it, or I really wanted to buckle down between third and fourth year and I improved, just something to show us that when push comes to shove at the end of the time, by and large, just like the general surgery boards, most people pass the written exam, but programs are going to be a little bit reluctant to pick somebody with single digit ABSITE scores in case you're going to be somebody that looks like we haven't graduated, somebody that can pass the written exam.
There's also a question about Canadian applicants who don't have ABSITE scores. Anyone want to talk about that? I feel like we have one or two every year. I'll tell you, I think it's fine. It's a non-issue in my life just because what we said, they don't necessarily tell us much. They sometimes confirm a picture. But I think if you're otherwise strong, it's okay.
We get graded on the ability of our applicant or our fellows or residents to graduate and pass their boards. And while there may not be a completely direct correlation between the ABSITEs and passing your boards, there is some correlation. And so I feel very difficult interviewing somebody because I only interview 30 people and I get 120 applications, that to interview somebody with single digit ABSITEs. So now I have taken 2 people who had very poor ABSITEs, one of which had already passed the Journal Surgical boards. And I consider that to be a get out of jail free card if you pass the Journal Surgical boards to not worry about your ABSITE scores. The other person took a few phone calls from various people who knew me very well to say, please let this guy in. He's really, really good. Okay, it took that to overcome my concern about his ABSITE scores. But you know what? He did great. So, I become a little more lenient on that. But there is a point that if you get 120 applications, you have 30 interview spots because your other staff just won't tolerate you doing any more. So you have to draw a line someplace. And that's one of the places that we draw a line.
Thank you. I don't know who's next in my rotation, which is totally my fail because I asked the two of you all. Why don't we try to go back because Dr. Snyder just gave a really helpful answer. Why don't we go back to Dr. Abelson? Can you talk a little bit more about research and how you judge research for applicants who did 2 years of research or 1 year or none or came from a program without colorectal options? Can you just talk about that for a second? And I'm going to shut off my camera for 2 seconds. So keep going, please.
Yeah, I mean, certainly someone who has like pages and pages of, reference, citations is going to appear more, impressive than someone who has like 2. And I guess, again, this depends on what program you're applying to and whether or not they care about things like that. Probably the most important thing I would say is that if you have something on your application and CV that you are very well prepared to talk about it. So there's probably nothing worse than having something on your CV that your interviewer thinks is really interesting, asks you questions, and you're like totally flop and fumble when you're trying to explain it. And so it doesn't matter if you have 30 publications, but if you can't speak intelligently about a project that your name is on, then that's not going to look good. So again, just like all of it, it's not just, one factor. There's going to be a lot of things that go into it. And if you're not coming from a place that had strong colorectal research, there's not much you can do about it. And so that's where you make sure your ABSITE scores are good. That's where you make sure that your letter of recommendations are good. That's where you make sure that you interview well, and that you're likable, trustable. So that's where sort of that holistic review comes in.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I agree. Research is a great example of holistic review and sort of distance traveled, right? If you spend 2 years with Dr. Abelson and you've written one middle author paper, that's like a red flag. Whereas if you come from a place with no colorectal surgeons and you did even non-colorectal research and it's a big push in your program to get even a case report presented at a meeting, then I'm impressed. Those are 2 very different applicant situations. And that's the whole point of reading the whole application. I mean, yes, we get 130, 40, whatever. That's actually not an unmanageable number to read, unlike general surgery, where it's more like 1,200. Any other comments about the role of research in your application?
Yeah, I have, and this is easy for me to say on the other side of things, but I think that part of when you go through fellowship applications is to figure out, you're going to be asked, it's only a year away, what kind of job do you want? And your application needs to kind of paint a picture of who you are and where you want to go. And if you haven't done research and you want to do clinical work, then say that. Just because you interviewed at a university place doesn't mean they pump out strictly academic surgeons. And it makes your application a lot more understandable if your personal statement and your research and everything else is lining up with a more of a clinical practice. And then, but you're saying you want to be an academic surgeon, but it doesn't look like you've put the effort in during residency to be an academic surgeon, then it's just pick who you are and stick with it. And then that kind of makes your whole application glow that much more. It's like, we identify who this person is and what they want to do. And if it's a high-powered academic institution, like I said, then Dr. Steinhagen and Snyder can also have already echoed that, they graduate all kinds of people, academic, private practice, there's all kind of mixes that come out of every program.
For the first 20 years of my being educational director, we did no research. We were a completely clinical private practice group. And when somebody came to say that, oh my God, I've not done any research, I say, we do some clinical research, but we don't do a lot of bench research. So research was a very low priority for the group for the first 20 years that I did this. And so I had no problems telling applicants that, it's okay if you haven't done research. I train clinical doctors too. Over the last 10 years, since we've been with the university, our research, both our interests and our production has increased tremendously. However, I don't force people to do a lot of research. Now, everybody has to do a little research project and try to get something to present at the meeting. However, it's hard to do a lot in 1 year, and we completely understand that. So if someone has a great deal of interest in research, I try to point them the right way. I have a great deal of resources to be able to do that. But if somebody doesn't, that's okay. It really is a personal decision about whether you want to have research be a big part of your career. And it is a personal decision, not something that we mandate.
I think that's such a great point, that it's a 1-year fellowship. It's a clinical fellowship. Whether you've done a lot of research and you can focus on your clinical, that's what I recommend. And if you haven't done a lot of research and you don't want to do a lot of research, I wouldn't spend the time that in your colorectal fellowship year doing it. But I think, what you were saying about being part of a story is a great one. And does anyone feel strongly that it has to be colorectal research versus other specialties? Okay. That was a question in the chat. So I just wanted to clear up that no one cares.
No.
The nice thing about the colorectal surgery research is that it gets you to the meeting, though. It does. And that is a great advantage for you because it's really fun. All right. Let's talk a little bit about personal statements. I think we're back to Dr. Kavlakis for the first comment. Can you talk a little bit about how you would recommend approaching the personal statement for colorectal, or what makes a great one, or pitfalls, whichever of those you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I have, maybe I'm too soft. I haven't really read a bad personal statement. But I think, certainly highlighting kind of, what draws you to the specialty. Again, you will find on both ends, there's answers we always hear, and there's questions you always ask, or questions we always ask you, and it's going to get repetitive quickly. But I think just kind of, again, trying to paint a picture of really who you are, and so that you can skip the first question, or you can find out how much the person has actually looked through your application, and this is who I am, and this is why I'm interested in colorectal surgery, and this is kind of where I hope to be, or why I want to, if you think that you're going to do something groundbreaking, or you're going to hopefully find a chemotherapy cure for the other non-mismatch repair deficient rectal cancers, that would be amazing. But something that would be, whatever drives you to go into colorectal is, kind of where to go. It doesn't need to be super long. It doesn't have to be, the most amazing story ever. Just like I said, I really haven't seen a bad one, honestly.
Yeah, I think something that I think we talk about at our program is sort of just having it be forgettable. maybe that's controversial, but I don't know. I mean, I guess if it's memorable, then I guess that's a good thing, but it could also be memorable in a bad way. So I feel like we tend to, probably advocate for just having it be boring. This is who I am. This is why I like it. Maybe that's not the right thing to say, but
I'm going to give really specific advice because I do a lot of this kind of advising. And what I would say is, first, if you're going to share an anecdote, make sure that the part about the patient or your colleague or whatever is very short, because what I really want to know is what it means about you. That's the first thing. Anecdotes are very controversial, and honestly, I don't really like them, but that's how I've learned to live with them. If you spend 5 or 6 sentences talking about the patient situation and all that, like, that's not great. Just say, I was taking care of someone really sick, and what did that say for you? That's the first thing. The second thing is I would write it in reverse order. Staring at a blank page is torture. But if you write a paragraph about what you want to get out of fellowship and or what your sort of broad strokes are for your career, which is going to end up being your last paragraph first, that's great. Write a paragraph or two about what you're looking for in a fellowship and what unique strengths you bring and how they will be interesting and useful both as a fellow and as a colorectal surgeon. And then you'll just have to write some sort of intro. And I would just sort of stick with that. I think it really doesn't have to be a wow statement. That said, proofread it, because when someone notices your spelling error or weird, awkward grammar, it does end up becoming a thing for them in some situations.
Personal statement gives me 2 pieces of information. It tells me a bit about how you think about yourself and how you perceive your place in the world. The other thing it does, it tells me if you can write. And I've been quite amazed at the inability of educational systems to allow people to write very well. And writing is a very difficult thing. And it's not something, frankly, that a lot of science people like us sometimes are very good at doing. My daughter, the lawyer, writes better at 26 than I do now. So it is somewhat innate to our specialty that we don't exactly are the best writers. However, you have to have a certain degree of being able to write, to be able to communicate in an effective way, both in all the emails and texts that we now have to do, but also scientifically, and be able to put something down on paper that isn't going to have to get, proofread 12 times to be able and reworked to make it sound good. And it's been a continual source of disappointment to me about how the writing skills have not improved over the last 20 years. However, I'm always open to new findings, so we'll see.
Use the formula, see how it goes. We got a question in the chat, and I think I want to just pause because I think this comes up now and again about residents who are training in another country who are not doing an ACGME accredited general surgery residency, but are interested in gaining colorectal training. I know that's not exactly what we want to focus on tonight, but can anyone sort of speak to their experiences with a resident who is in this situation?
We're not really allowed to train non-ACGME residents because they won't be able to sit to the boards. So our institution doesn't allow it. However, when we were private practice, there were several people from Canada that came through our program. And there were a couple of people who matriculated us for 6 months, one from Lebanon and one from Turkey that we did helped train. So it's not something we do often. It's certainly not a formal ACGME training program, but there are some people that we have done that for in the past. And frankly, out of the goodness of our heart, we didn't charge anything. That we just had them, they just rotate on our service and learn how to do the surgery. So, or being a doctor.
Did any of you, by chance, have co-fellows, maybe who were international, who were there? That targeted question.
We did not. We've been asked several times if we could take somebody, but it's been a lot of trouble with visas and such, especially in the last couple of years with COVID.
I had international fellows where I was, but it was for a whole year kind of thing. One of my co-fellows was Canadian and went through the match, and the other two are on a constant kind of stream of usually from Israel and come over to train with Dr. Wexner on a repeated basis, and they also occasionally had visa issues, but I think there's so much of an international thing set up just specifically with that situation that it's usually ironed out well before they get there.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple places that have this, and it's hard to find, but I would start looking at unaccredited spots, and or places where you can go and do a year of research and then do a year of sort of something clinical-ish to do it. Before we shift gears to interviews, is there a number? If you had a general surgery resident sitting in your office saying, how many programs should I apply to? Is there a number you'd give them, or is there a way that you would say, well, for you, I'd do this many? How would you come down on that, knowing cost, but Zoom interviews and that sort of stuff?
I think it's variable. And I think things have changed a little bit when things are virtual. So, I think I applied to 20, maybe ended up interviewing at 10 to 12, something along those lines. So it's good to get some numbers from people who've done it in the past.
I think if you have a very strong application, you may not need to cast as wide of a net, but if you have some holes in your application, you may need to apply more broadly to keep all of your options open. And I do think with virtual interviews, we're getting a lot more applications than when we did when it was in person, because a lot of that, there is some cost when you're doing the application fees, but after that, you don't have the travel expenses. And so I think people are overall just applying more broadly than they used to. I don't think there's necessarily a set number. When I was on the interview trail, I think 10 to 15 was the average that most people had. And so I think that's when people who've in our program have interviewed for colorectal, they've said they've applied to nearly every place because it's virtual and they can. So I think that has changed things a little bit.
I try to tell our residents that it's a numbers game. So if you're one of those people that wants to go to a smaller fellowship and you're the only child, or there's, they take 2 per year, then I would apply to more places, because then the number of spots that you're eligible to match into off of 12 interviews is much less than somebody else who went on 12 interviews with multiple fellow spots and they're eligible for 35 spots. So it is a little bit of a numbers game. If you're going to apply to if you want a small fellowship and you're the only one, I would interview more programs so that you have more potential spots that you can match into, because those, obviously you don't know if they're taking an internal person or if there's somebody that they know from their residency, and in the blink of an eye, your top 3 places can very easily be taking people that are from their own institution. Who knows? But I would just be wary of that. If you're going to go to a small program, I would try to interview at more places so you can potentially match into more spots.
I think it's gotten really hard, because I do think there is a certain percentage of interviews that are being given to a very small number of applicants. And so if you're not going to be one of those applicants, it's hard to know how many other places to apply to. So what I'd actually like to take this moment to do is to say, please don't do that to your colleagues. These are your colleagues. Don't apply to places that you're really never going to go. If you are in the good fortune situation to be a relatively competitive applicant, do not apply to places you're not interested in, just in case. That's not a thing. I think there is no number. I think it's personal. I think it depends also how much you know or don't know what you want. I think keeping an open mind is great. But if you know that you're really going to thrive in a one fellow program, you don't need to apply to all the big programs that are not the right place for you. On the other hand, if you're really not sure, I do think you should interview a little bit more to see what else is out there. It is hard to get a feel until you're sort of quote unquote there for the day. We have some other questions in the chat just about application type things. In terms of choosing letter writers, if you have to make a choice between someone who's really well known, maybe your division chief, who doesn't know you all that well, versus a sort of a local community colorectal surgeon who may not have the same network, but knows you really well, maybe as your mentor, how do you balance those choices? What would you advise?
I would tell you this, your community local colorectal surgeon probably has a much better personal contacts with the program directors than your five-star general surgery chief, okay, who doesn't know any of the program directors, and the program directors don't even know he exists, frankly, most of them. So as a result, your best contacts are going to be the colon rectal surgeons that you have had contact with, the people who actually probably sort of pushed you on the road to becoming a colon rectal surgeon. Those people know you. Those people will be able to write you good letters. Those people can also call and talk to people that they know. And I can't tell you how important that is.
Yeah, I think I tried to find a balance. You know, I had my main sort of research mentor who maybe wasn't quite as well known, but knew me really well. And then, you know, I had our chief who knew me pretty well, you know, definitely not as well as my main mentor, but it's like everyone knows him. So like you get a letter from him. And so it's a little weird if you come from a program and you don't have a letter from Dave Dietz. Like, why don't you have a letter from Dave Dietz?
I don't even know what that is.
So our resident did that this year. I want to tell you, just because like one of our residents who applied this year was my mentee, someone who I had a very close relationship with. And what we came down on was that I was going to talk about it in my letter. And you have a close relationship with someone, like figure it out. But I agree, like if you don't have a letter from that person, it's going to make people wonder. At the same time, that person can call for you. This is such a small community that you're joining, and it's so wonderful that we can say anything goes because both can be true. Is the general surgery program director letter a must?
I think it's a good idea because that's also somebody who really is supposed to know who you are and really almost always should have your vested interests at heart. So a lukewarm letter from your general surgery program director is certainly going to be a red flag. And frankly, I don't think I've seen more than a couple of those in the 20 years that I've been doing this as program director. So I'll tell you what, it's almost always a good letter, but it also tells certain things that they see about your personality and everything that almost always helps you, okay? So that letter is a good letter, and I would strongly recommend it.
The one thing I would add about the general surgery PD is that colorectal has this standardized letter. And if your general surgery program director is not a colorectal surgeon, you need to spend some time with them, making sure that they understand what this letter is and what the Likert scales look like. I'm going to refer you to some recent abstracts from ASCRS about how those letters usually play out, so that if you have someone who's not familiar with it, who's writing your letter, they understand the hidden curriculum there too. All right, we're going to transition to talking about interviews. What are you looking for in an applicant, and what really makes people stand out? Dr. Gazer, I'm going to move over to you, I think, as the person who's had the fewest first chances at the questions.
So as far as what makes the person stand out, I think it's not necessarily one thing per se, but I think it's just your overall how they connect during the interview is probably one of the most important things for us. if they're a name dropper during the interview, I feel like that's a turnoff. If, you know, they just come off as a little, they just don't have good emotional intelligence during the interview, I think those things are red flags. If they just don't have situational awareness, those are things just, you know, off the top of my head that I've seen during interviews that have really kind of made people on the DNR list. So I think overall, it's how we connect with you during the interview that's the most important. All these other things that make up your interview, I think for the most part, you know, are fairly, people do fairly well with those, with your personal statement, with your research. People are fairly evenly spread out. But I think how you portray yourself when you're talking about why you want to be a colorectal surgeon, do you light up and are you so excited about it? And is it someone that we feel that enthusiasm, it's going to stretch through that whole year, and every time, you know, you've got a butt case, so you're going to jump on it because you're excited by it, and because that's who we are. And so we want someone who connects with us on that level. We want people to get excited about hemorrhoids because we do too, to a certain degree. So, you know, to us, those are the people that really stand out. I think people that just kind of like jump off the screen when we're virtual, as far as like, you know, you can really tell they're passionate about their future and they're excited about their future. And that makes us excited to want to train you too.
Yeah, I think I'll just say there have definitely been times, especially with the virtual format, that someone is like very clearly not engaged at all in the interview process, like skips half of the interview or some social function, and is just like not there. And so, and maybe that's like trying to fit a bajillion interviews, whereas otherwise you wouldn't be able to do that if you were in person, not sure. But lock yourself in a room, be fully committed during that time, and don't let the virtual format, you know, label you as somebody who's not interested and doesn't care.
I really love it when I get an applicant like Alessandra talked about. Those are the easy ones to be able to grade and all. But they're not everybody is always as curious and being able to really show their ability to talk on Zoom. There are a lot of quieter people there. They're going to be fantastic surgeons, and you know, part of my job is to sort of draw them out and see what they can say and what they can say about themselves and what they want to do, their dreams and aspirations. I know these are difficult things sometimes for people to talk about. It's easy when they're very gregarious, up and down. Oh yeah, you know, and the excitement, and we love it too. But there are some very good applicants out there who are not as gregarious, and I try very hard not to you know, get concerned about that, because I know not everybody that we've trained or that I would train in my life is going to be as gregarious as I would like to be them to be. So, you know, but that is something we look at very carefully.
I think that's such a great point, and it brings up the next thing I wanted to touch on with regards to interviews. I'm hoping we can pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about how we set up our interview days to manage some of the biases we all have, and the bias towards people who have a little more energy, and how to assess people. Because we're, you know, I kept hearing as an applicant, we want someone we can live with for the year. And I was like, but wait a minute, I'm totally different than you. You know, I'm a New Yorker. So how have you all set up your interview days or your interview evaluations to manage some of the biases we all have in surgery?
We had multiple interviewers. Not only I interview everybody, but my assistant program director, she has a great perspective on people, and it's different from mine. So I get to hear what she has to say. I have a very old mentor, Randy Bailey, who interviews people, has a very good perception of how people think. And I have some of my younger staff interview also, so that they get not only they get a lot of practice interviewing, but it's a different perspective on people. And between everybody's perspective, we get a good idea as much as we can about that person. So everybody, we sort of pull our thoughts, and that's how we rank people. It just isn't me. Is everybody that interviews or comes in contact with that person, it gives me some kind of feedback about what they thought, how they really perceive them as being someone who could be in our program.
I'm going to share with you our detail. We have, each interview room has a theme, and we ask people to ask the same questions. And we have like a system with anchors that we use to start off our discussions, so that we make sure that we're being consistent and we're going beyond the like, well, I really liked her stuff. That stuff definitely obviously comes out, right? We're a small group, but I think most places are particularly thoughtful now about what they want to know. We're not just saying go in a room and chat for 15 minutes. I think those days are over, although certainly when I applied, there was a lot of that.
At our program, we all do unconscious bias training as standard. I'm sure that's pretty standardized perhaps throughout all the institutions these days, but we all undergo that training, and we have standard questions that we ask as well. We have a very diverse group, and we all connect with the applicants on different levels. And I think that's helpful too, because we have, I think, the diversity of of all the partners who all interview with all the applicants helps kind of give us a wider breadth of perspectives as well. It's not just a couple of people interviewing, it's all 8 of us.
We're getting pretty close to the hour. I don't have any other questions in the chat. Now's your moment. While you think of your questions, I'm gonna thank each of our panelists and ask them to give their best piece of advice. So we will start with whoever wants to amongst the 4 of you. What's your best piece of advice for a general surgery resident who's planning to apply in colorectal?
I'll go first, I guess. I would say that the interview season is very fun. I know it's very different these days, but I would try and make the most of it, because the people that you are meeting at all the places they're interviewing are people that maybe you don't train there, but you're also having an opportunity to make an impression with these people, and take that into your career. Where, as Dr. Steinhagen has said many times, we're a very small knit community. So it's a great opportunity to get to know some of the colorectal surgeons in your field, and you're going to use those connections throughout your career. I think it used to be that during your interview trail, you would make really close connections with the people in your interview class. That may be a little bit lost with the Zoom, unfortunately, which I think is a huge loss, because getting together at meetings again, is still super fun with those people you made really strong connections with. But it's a great time. It's a great time to make lifelong connections with people, and you'll really enjoy our field. So I'm excited for all of you guys.
One small thing. Please, please, please put your application in the first day it opens. A lot of us sit down within 2 or 3 days of an opening, and frankly, we already have 60 applications there, and most of the interview slots get filled within the first week or so. So don't get your application in late. I do look at all the late applications, and I do interview people there from the late applications, but it's so much easier if you have a good application to get a whole bunch of interviews that you might not all have gotten by just putting it in on the day that it's due. Okay, the first day it opens.
I kind of have 2 pieces of advice that are completely unrelated to each other. The first one is that I would echo what Dr. King Mullen said in the beginning, is try to go for a program that can offer you something different than what you've gotten the past 5 years. If you feel like you came from a very good laparoscopic program but didn't get to touch the robot much, then that's your time to change. Or if you did a lot of robotics and not a lot of laparoscopic, again, just try to diversify yourself as much as you can, because this is step number one. And then when you get hired as an attending, that's your step number two for kind of broadening your horizons a little bit. And then once you've settled into attendinghood, nobody's teaching you anything new after that. So I would try to make that a conscious effort. And then the second thing is, this is, again, maybe a little bit more of a personal pet peeve, but I still feel like there's a very strong pull for people to tell academic places that they want to do academic surgery. And then if I probe a little bit and say, well, what does that mean to you? People are like, well, I like to teach. It's like, well, on my contract, 10% of my job is teaching. So academic surgery doesn't mean that you like to teach. You can teach in a community setting. You can teach in a hybrid program. If you want to get grants and research and be on QI projects and be in the upper echelon, like try to, make sure you have a good, mature understanding of what academic surgery is if you're going to say that that's what you want to do.
And the whole process is exhausting. So I would just, really try and each interview, that's where you want to be. Don't mail it in, for a particular interview or for a particular interviewer. And I think to, Alessandra's point, I got my job in part because I interviewed at a place where I did not end up going. And so great networking, and you might end up looking for a job at a place that you interviewed at.
I think I get the last word too, which is awesome. I hadn't considered that. The first thing that I would say is enthusiasm. Even if you're not like a naturally enthusiastic person, whatever version of enthusiasm it is for you, please try to get it across somehow. But the real thing I would say is now's the time to really reflect internally. Let go of all of everyone else's expectations for you. You're the only person that lives your life. Go to the place that you want to go to, that you think is the right fit for you. Not where your mentor went or where your mentor thinks you should go or any of those other things. Don't go to the place because historically it was amazing. If it's not what you want when you get there, don't be afraid to shift gears, but really just be true to yourself, because you're the one who has to live with that. That's my advice. All right, it's a wrap. 2 minutes early.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all for having us. This has really been a wonderful thing for our committee to do, and I was excited to see so many people on tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll stay on for another 5 minutes, but have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Hi, everybody.